Hello, welcome back to our second session of our Digital Humanities and Heritage Conference. Topic of the second session is Digital Humanities and Open Science. And I'm thrilled actually to have here three great experts in this field, great people, and my dear colleagues, Jennifer, Edmond, Jadranka, Stojanovski, and Ivan Marić. So we will start with Jennifer. And her presentation named The Arts and Humanities from Tourists to Citizens in the Republic of Data. But for a start, just a few words to say about Jennifer. She's Associate Professor of Trinity College Dublin, co-director of the Trinity Center for Digital Humanities, and the director of Trinity's MPhil in Digital Humanities and Culture. Jennifer also serves as president of the board of directors of the DARIAH. She represents the body on the open science policy platforms, which support the European Commission in developing and promoting open science project policies. And she has coordinated several great European projects. But you can read more about her biography and activities on our webpage. So I will give her the floor to start with her presentation.
Thank you so much, Corlika. I just want to make sure, can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Then let me share my screen. This is the one you want. All right. I'm assuming you can see the title of the presentation as promised, yes?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. So thank you very much for asking me to come and speak this morning. It's a great pleasure. For very general reasons, obviously, I'm always thrilled to be able to connect with some of the members of the DARIAH community directly, but also for a very specific reason, which I'll come back to in just a minute. So thinking about my slightly enigmatic title of my presentation to you today about becoming from tourists to citizens in the Republic of Data, this idea of the Republic of Data really goes back to a 2017 address given by Carlos Moedas at the European Open Science Cloud Summit. Unfortunately, the text of his words are no longer available, and I consider that almost emblematic for what's happening with the European Open Science Cloud, but I think we can fix it. At the time, Commissioner Moedas characterized this European Open Science Cloud, which was still very much in formation, as the new Republic of Letters. So hearkening back to the exchange between the great philosophers of the 18th century and the idea that we could come together and create new knowledge together using the kinds of exchanges, not letters as they had then, but the exchanges of data. And the other thing, the fact, aside from the fact that he was using a very humanistic metaphor, which obviously I was very pleased to see, the other thing that I really liked about his comments that day was what is here on the slide, the fact that he was really looking at the intersection of disciplines, at interdisciplinarity as a key driver for the kinds of innovations we could drive through this open science cloud. And I thought, if that can be delivered, that really is inspiring. And if that can be delivered through infrastructure, that's even more inspiring, because I've always believed that we cannot underestimate those layers of support and the common well we all draw from to do our work. So the fact that we have the idea of the Republic of Letters becoming an infrastructure of data was one that I was very excited about. But if we both fast forward and rewind, and I say fast forward and rewind because this book that I show you the cover of here, this book came from Zadar. This book came from a meeting we had at the University of Zadar. I don't know if Franjo Pejar is in the room today, but if he is, he was our gracious host. And in a room which may even be the one that I see you sitting in now. we had a meeting about, well, we talk a lot about the digital humanities, but where are the edges of that? And where are the ways in which we're having to change our practices generally to adopt to the new digital paradigm? And it took us a few years. I think it probably took us about 6 years to come to this volume. But though many of us in that room that day were the ones who ended up contributing to this volume, and many other things came from that very influential meeting in Zadar that day. So I had to pull a quote from this book because I had to be able to tell that story. But it's quite appropriate to think, well, we have this idea of infrastructure as being a driver of the new republic of letters that's based on data. And you have the idea that this is going to be interdisciplinary. So we need all the disciplines there, because remember, open science is only open if it's not closed, if it doesn't have closed doors to certain approaches and disciplines. So the idea that what does data mean in the humanities? How are data more complex perhaps for us? How do we share them if we don't own them? Because I think that the idea of this particular meeting is focusing on DH and heritage is really important, because for us as researchers, again, the well we draw from is based in the museums, libraries, and archives. If we don't recognize them as research data, then we lose a lot of potential before we've even begun to build this new republic of letters based on data. So this question was always in my mind about, well, how do we deliver interdisciplinarity in the new republic of letters, involving all the disciplines, when we have some disciplines for whom key terms and key understandings around these research processes are really very different. And so again, this brings me back to the answer. Well, of course, the answer is infrastructure, because again, the more we can establish that common basis, the better off we are. So if we're having this answer be infrastructure, so where do we start? Where do we build? How do we reconceptualize so that the arts and humanities, these disciplines that are not seeing themselves, or perhaps not being seen by others as data intensive, can really be full and thorough players in this new environment? So that kind of brings me to the idea of, okay, well, if we're going to talk about infrastructure, where do we start? So we have to look back so we can look forward. And I always really appreciated this European Science Foundation report from 2011, because the authors really, they took ownership of infrastructure in a very, I don't even want to say courageous, but in a very forthright way. Because what they said in this report is that if we're going to talk about infrastructure in a historical dimension, well, you know what, CERN, you may have been around for a while, but we go back to the 3rd century BC. The humanity, it is in the field of humanities, it is in the idea of culture and heritage and institutions of the sort that we work with all the time, that the concepts and the values and the motivations for infrastructure for research really come from. So we have this idea that you can go all the way back to the 3rd century BC and find the museum, this kind of culture center, university, and library founded in Alexandria under the successors of Alexander the Great. So on the one hand, we have this very, very strong historical trend towards having the arts and humanities have a very, very strong hold and a very strong connection to research infrastructure. But of course, this word infrastructure is problematic. And nowadays, when you talk about infrastructure, people do not immediately think of the Library of Alexandria, strangely enough, unless they talk to me too much. They think about things kind of like that picture in the middle. They think about bricks and mortar and roads and bridges, these very hard things. And one of the things I find, actually, it's very interesting. I go to a lot of meetings about research infrastructure. And all of the presenters always have pictures of their infrastructure. And it may be a building site. It may be very, very large concrete bunkers with instrumentation in them. Radar dishes are also popular. I have a bit of infrastructure envy because I don't have those kinds of photographs. I can't say, right, here is a photograph of Daria. This is our thing. But I think we have something more powerful, because what we do is we have the flexibility to not just view infrastructure for this bricks and mortar hard in this kind of conceptualization that has come to be very accepted, but we can also view it as knowledge spaces and marketplaces, places of exchange. When I say marketplace, I don't mean a place where you buy things, because yes, you will buy things in a marketplace, but you will also, if you live in a country like Ireland, you will also run into 10 people you will exchange information, you will connect, you will learn. So really the kinds of exchanges in the marketplace that I find most are these kind of souk-like, neighborhood-like, community-like exchanges that happen. And I think those, for the kinds of knowledge creation we undertake in the arts and humanities, are perhaps even more important than some of those more specific technical instrumentation-based interactions that you would have at some of these more photographable research infrastructures. Now, this idea that infrastructure might be more than just the bricks and mortar, this also has, at least in theory and in policy, a strong underpinning as well. So again, I'm going back here to 2006, the first ESFRI roadmap. And I always find it interesting how in the ESFRI roadmap, which is foundational for DARIAH, remember DARIAH was proposed within the first ESFRI roadmap and then became one of these ERICs, these European Research Infrastructure Consortia. And that whole instrument was drawn from the imperatives of the ESFRI roadmap. And so to go back to that foundational moment for how we build infrastructure together better in Europe is very important for me. And when we look at this kind of definition, you can see that the desire here was not to say, okay, infrastructure is a building with an instrument in it where people go. There was a desire to open that definition up. And I think that opening up of the definition was something very powerful and very influential and instrumental for the moving forward of research infrastructure in Europe. So the idea that it would be facilities, resources or services, associated human resources, major equipment, knowledge containing resources such as collections, archives, and databases. They may be single-sided, they may be distributed, they may be virtual, they may be structured information systems, they may be technology-based. I call this the research infrastructure definition by comma delimited field, because it's literally, this, comma, that, comma, that, comma, that, add what you want on there. So the power of this is it gave us the permission and the imperative to build research infrastructure as it needed to be for our communities. But it also left things quite open in a way that became difficult because, again, these old mental images of what infrastructure was and should be persisted. So how did we as a community, as the arts and humanities, but also as DARIAH, as that community's representative on that early roadmap, how did we respond? Well, the first thing we had to do was we had to deal with the past. Now, one of the things I noticed very quickly when I began to work with DARIAH is that we had a number of different communities coming together. And in many cases, we had these agreements and these practices for working together, which were based on the old form. So we were kind of in this incunabular state where we had a new technology, we had new affordances, but we were still bringing with us some of the old practices. And I think of these two guys, as representative of the practices that I felt we had to reconsider and question when we were building DARIAH. You may not recognize them by their pictures, but you might recognize them by their names. So on the left-hand side, we have Leopold von Ranke, the German historian of the 19th century, whose claim to fame was to write history as it actually was. The idea that working through the sources, you could create something that transparently communicated and recreated history is a very compelling and interesting one. Obviously not where we would see history today, but still very much ingrained in some of the research processes. We work through the sources to get to some kind of interpretation. But then on the right-hand side, we've had Antonio Panizzi, his work, 91 Rules to be Observed in Preparing and Entering Titles, with a claim to fame of denying the historian Thomas Carlyle access to uncatalogued materials. And this is what I saw that these two imperatives, the imperative to work through the sources to get to the interpretation, and the imperative to protect the sources, to ensure the integrity of the sources, they were coming into some kind of tension. This tension before, when we'd had physical institutions, could be resolved on a human-to-human basis, and very productively as well. But now that we were working more at larger scale with virtual institutions, it became much more difficult to have those kinds of conversations. And so we go to enter Daria, which is, again, you all know this, but I put this slide here to remind us where we're starting from. The idea of a pan-European digital research infrastructure for the arts and humanities. And note that we call ourselves a digital research infrastructure for the arts and humanities, not a research infrastructure for the digital humanities, because again, the digital has a different effect on different disciplines and different researchers in different ways. And we want to make sure we're there to serve them all, not just those who self-identify as digital humanists. I think this is one of the reasons why open science has become so important for Daria. It is one of those places where no matter what you do and no matter what tools you use, you will see the digital influence your work. And so we began from that and from the idea that we could empower research communities with digital methods to create, connect, and share knowledge about culture and society. Again, you all know this, you are all a part of this, you are all counted in the census somewhere, but just to remind ourselves of the scale of Daria as an infrastructure, or rather as a group of people who build infrastructure together, which is really, to me, the more interesting and important thing. So we have this ambit, although we have 20 country members and 1 observer, we have on top of that, over 1,000 people working in those institutions, over 230 institutions bringing together those people. We have cooperating partners in countries where we don't have partners. And the results on the left-hand side are really astonishing. Almost 17 million euros in 2020 of leverage spent at the national level and at the EU level. More than 700 publications, and I think this is very much an underestimate. More than 200 million sessions on the various platforms across the various institutions. It is a significant facilitator to work. And when we talk about how we build Daria and the things that we consider in Daria, we always talk about, and again, you know all this, but it's interesting to remember it again as we're talking about how Daria is a part of that new republic of letters, new republic of data. We have a strategic plan, and in that strategic plan, we include and embrace the diverse community, the different kinds of institutions we have with us, the distributed structure with our nodes and central services, the transferability of methods that we think is so important, and the idea that research infrastructure should be holistic, tactical, and open. So not trying to take every research process and turn it into our process, not trying to take every research process and hiving off small bits of it, but being holistic, tactical, and open. And to do this, we have what we call these sort of 4 pillars. So the first of these is the idea of a marketplace that facilitates the fluid exchange of tools, services, data, and knowledge. This is our data infrastructure. And I will talk a lot about that, but I think, again, to contextualize that and ensure that we keep that contextualized in the other ways that Daria conceptualizes, builds, and facilitates infrastructure is really important. So we try to transform by building access to education and training. We connect through working groups, hubs, and other forms of transnational and transdisciplinary organization. And we complement, through which we build bridges between research and policy, and research policy and communities of practice. Again, very much something you can see in the work on open science. Thinking about this, and again, I will come back to services, but I think it's also, again, the context is really important, because if we were just the services, then that actually wouldn't be Daria. And a great example, I think, is when we found ourselves in the teeth of the pandemic, we sort of scratched our heads and we watched, the biosciences pulling together and all the social sciences. And we thought, well, actually there's a lot going on at a cultural level as well. How can Daria support that? So we had a Daria theme, and asked for calls for applications for a small amount of funding to do projects around the arts, humanities, and COVID-19. And we had a wonderful array of projects. These have already released their midterm results. You can find them on the DARIAH website, but the idea that how we see the virus, how we imagine the virus is important. This is the kind of data and information you just weren't finding in the discussions, and yet it was everywhere. The metaphors and the images that were everywhere. Resilience in the arts, the fate of intangible cultural heritage like folk music. The idea of place and space became very important. The idea that certain art forms were moving forward in this sort of very digitally intense time. And the fact that we could use some of the toolkit of the arts, such as interactive visualizations to increase trust in science. All of these came out, and all of these came out because we have, alongside that very kind of recognizable data infrastructure side of DARIAH, we also have this support for the emerging and the transformative groupings within our midst. But I want to come back now to that question of services. So this idea of an open marketplace, because this is where I think we're doing what we can to be a part of that ecosystem and be a part of what we can, how we can harness this new republic of letters in order to become citizens and not just tourists in this republic. So I step back for a second to tell you a little bit, again, about the Open Science Cloud. I'm not going to talk about open science in general. There are better people to do that with me. Being followed by somebody like Jadranka, or having my colleague Elspeth speaking elsewhere in the program. But I will speak a little bit here about the European Open Science Cloud. I know that we're going to hear more about the Croatian Open Science Cloud in a minute as well. So I am going to stay narrow here and come back to DARIAH quickly. But one of the things that began to worry me after that 2017 European Open Science Cloud Summit was the fact that you actually saw the focus being more and more on this idea of core services. Now, core services are important for infrastructure, and I'll come back to the idea of core services and where DARIAH sits in relationship to core services. But the idea that we would need these kind of federation tools, that we would need data repositories, these are very far from the kind of community-based attitude and values that we try and promote in DARIAH. Think about those COVID projects and the way they pulled from the bottom up. This all of a sudden is becoming very top down. And within that top down, there is also this thinking about the idea of a minimum viable EOSC. And again, I began to worry about that because when you start to talk about a minimal subset, a representative subset, then oftentimes it's that long tail that falls outside of that minimum viable product. And I became very worried that because our data, because of the fact that we share its ownership with the culture heritage institutions, because of the fact that researchers don't always recognize the terminology around data as representing what they do, because of the fact that there is a sense of decontextualization with shared data that is antithetical to the very rich context of the arts and humanities. This idea of this minimum viable EOSC became a little worrisome to me. So I began to think, and we as DARIAH began to think, okay, well, what is the intervention that we want to make? What makes sense for our community? And how do we make sure that we can plug in our researchers to the very influential developments happening at the European level and at the national level around the European Open Science Cloud? And this began for us a development within the SHOCK project, which I'll talk more about in a second, around the structure of the DARIAH Marketplace, or the SHOCK, the SSH Open Marketplace, as it later became called as we worked with more partners to build it. But also around the kinds of services that we have within our infrastructure, within our consortium, and the way that we use them. And we came up with this sort of taxonomy of services because we were looking at the services that are contributed to DARIAH as national in-kind services. And some of these are very much national services. You'll see there the Person's Encyclopedia from Croatia was one of the examples we thought of, because this is a service built at the national level, but of course available for use in other ways. So these come from in-kind, they come from national and local projects. They are a very specific kind of scientific instrumentation. And within DARIAH, we have about 100 services like this. And they are exceptionally important for the researchers who use them. But again, remember, the arts and humanities is a big place. There's a lot of different disciplines in that. There's a lot of different approaches. And so you're going to have not the one service. Okay, there are always services that get below the work for everyone. We all probably use email. We're all using Zoom today. But when you come down to those research needs, you're going to find that in Poland, there is a group that needed literary bibliography, and that's what they built. In Portugal, there was this group that really needed that early music database, and that's what they built, and that's what they can share through DARIAH. We also have very much these larger open national services, of which there's about 20. Things like a single sign-on service, or the consent form wizard, or the Tadira taxonomy, or the HAL repository. These are, again, much less specialized, but still equally important, and places where we can find cost savings via service sharing. Then the third level that we determined was this idea of central registries. These are ones that we actively curate a little more centrally: the course registry, DARIAH Campus for training and education, and the SSH Open Marketplace itself. And these are ones where you will find the larger input, but they're largely for finding things that are, again, built elsewhere. And then we have level 4, which is kind of the back office thing. So like the DARIAH website, the in-kind collection tool. These are important, they're facilitators, but they're not the ones that you want to kind of focus on, because they're not the ones that facilitate research directly. And when you look at how we do this through the nationals, I think it's very interesting to just look at 2 countries. I specifically didn't pick Croatia because you don't want to call anybody out. But in countries like France, you think, okay, well, this is a big country, they're going to contribute a lot, and they do, but quite varied. So things like the repository, which is a national service offered as an in-kind to EU level researchers, the named entity recognition service, which is built in a project, but now hosted in France, or the DARIAH website itself, which we said we need a host for this. And Humanum in France was able to take that on as a part of their contribution to DARIAH. If you look on the other side at a country like Austria, much smaller, but they have actually initiated a large number of projects. So they actually are the home of the course registry, which was an internal project, which we now share with Clarin. DARIAH Teach, which was a funded project, now being hosted from Time as partner. We have the SSH Marketplace itself, which is a central service we're developing. And of course, we have the ELDA Content Wizard, which is the result of a working group. So you can see how different parts of that ecosystem are building together, contributing in, and ensuring that the services that we all need to be a part of that Republic of Letters are available to us, and that they are tuned to our needs and available to us as and when we need. Now, I mentioned that this SSH Open Marketplace, which we had conceptualized originally as the DARIAH Marketplace, but now have opened it up. This was being built in the process of the context of this SHOC project, the SSH Open Cloud. And you can see at the top, one of the great things about the SSH Open Cloud project is that it has brought us together with Clarin, but also with SHARE, with the European Social Survey, with SESTA, and with EOS, what we would imagine is the next research infrastructure to join our group on social and cultural innovation. But look a little deeper and you'll find as well that this question around shared ownership of cultural data is also built into this consortium and into this project. So we have LIBER as the consortium of libraries there, and also partners like the National Gallery bringing their research communities and their research questions. So we have that incredible opportunity. And what I've realized working through SHOC over the years is that DARIAH has a very specific place in the EOS ecosystem. And I hesitate very often. I will have people, especially North Americans, will say, yeah, you can do this in the EOS. And I'm like, where is the EOS? Because the EOS is distributed. There are national initiatives that tie into it. There is the EOS Association, of which some are members, some are not. And of course, you know, when you have something that is open, but only some people are members, it gets very confusing. There are projects like SHOC itself or like EOS Future. So there are questions around where the EOS is. So I'm training myself now, and I encourage you all to join me. I don't know what the Croatian is for EOS Ecosystem, but I'm tying those two words together very intentionally, because I think when we start to view this as an ecosystem, then we really can start to see that republic of letters emerging through data. Because if you think about it, if you're an individual researcher with a research question, so you're going to look for your specific data in an institution. But what we can do in DARIAH is we don't want to recreate that institution. We don't want to recreate the repository of a museum, library, or archive. What we can do, though, is we can provide streamlined, contextualized, community-based access to the kinds of tools you need. We can help you find that Croatian encyclopedia of persons if that's what you need. So we in DARIAH are focusing on visibility over the specific instrumentation you may need. Then we have something like SHOC. Now, SHOC is, again, going back to Mojdeš's original vision, SHOC has this interdisciplinary integration. And I think that's very, very important. Because when I think about FAIR data, we talk a lot about FAIR data. We talk a lot about the I in FAIR data being about interoperability. For me, the most important interoperability is not technical, it's intellectual, it's epistemic. It's about how do I, as somebody trained in literature, how do I use data produced by a historian? How do I use data produced by a sociologist? How do I use data produced by an environmental scientist, a geologist, by a bioscientist? That's much harder than making some kind of crosswalk to allow those two data sets to somehow talk to each other, because I don't necessarily know the conditions under which that data was created. So I can see this then as it connects into the stable, interoperable, durable, and dependable services of the European Open Science Cloud as that center bit, as the EOS core. And I need a good metaphor. I am a literature scholar by training. So when I think about the metaphor for this positioning as intellectual middleware that we have as DARIAH, I think, okay, if you're a researcher, you have a research question, you want a slice of toast. So what do you need? You find your bread in the Cultural Heritage Institution. That is it. That is the central thing. But within DARIAH, we can provide you with a toaster. But of course, the bread and the toaster aren't enough. You need something to plug the toaster into. Plugs and sockets are standardized. Plugs and sockets are switchable. They are interoperable in that way. And then we have the electricity, which is the fundamental in all of this. We forget about it. But this is really what I think the EOS core can provide for us. The electricity that facilitates the standardized instrumentation that fits everybody at the interdisciplinary level, the plugs and sockets, into which we can plug the toaster so we can get the toast that allows us to answer our research question. So remember, toast is what you need to answer a research question. This for me is really how I see this new republic of letters actually working, how we can reimagine, not even reimagine, but kind of rehabilitate that originating vision of the European Open Science Cloud. To do this, I think we as an arts and humanities community can do a few very, very simple things. Make sure we bring our old infrastructures to the new ones. Don't forget the cultural data. Again, I don't need to tell you this, but if you need a slide to tell somebody else this, here's your slide. We need to preserve the diversity of knowledge spaces. We need to remember that knowledge is nomadic and the next discovery may be someplace we don't expect it. We need to insist that open isn't open if it is exclusive, this minimum viable product approach to the EOS. We need to make sure that while we need to build something, we need to make sure we build something that is inclusive. We need to capitalize on collective action to support specialized instrumentation. Again, this is where DARIAH, this is the fundamental understanding of DARIAH, is that we can work together to support small communities rather than work together to support one big community. And finally, remembering that the EOS isn't a place, it's an ecosystem. When we switch to that little change, then our own place in it is much easier to see, whether we are an individual researcher or somebody working at a national level or somebody working in an EU infrastructure. So I'd encourage you to take this slide away and present it to anyone who says that the arts and humanities have no place in the European Open Science Cloud, that we have no place in these data-driven workflows. And hopefully you'll find that maybe energizing and something we can maybe pull through into the next two presentations on open science and the Open Science Cloud within Croatia. So it leaves me just to say, hvala. I hope I pronounced that right. And thank you for inviting me. And I hope you have a great rest of your workshop.
You can get an applause now when we are in the hybrid mode, at least. So thank you, Jennifer, for this fantastic and really inspiring presentation. It's always great to hear what you have to say. We are sorry you couldn't join us this time, since we have here some dear colleagues from the DARIAH community. We would love to hang out with you here. So thank you. Our next presenter is also here, Jadranka Stojanovski. I've been expecting you here in the room, Jadranka. I'm sorry you couldn't join us in person, but we are grateful to have you at least virtually this time. So Jadranka is an associate professor at the University of Zadar and the research librarian at the Ruđer Bošković Institute, with more than 20 years of professional experience in designing and creating scholarly information infrastructures following open science principles. She has an interdisciplinary background in physics and information sciences, and she has also a PhD in information sciences. Her research is mainly in the areas of open science, scholarly communication, peer review, and research assessment. She also takes part in international communities, networks, and projects concerning different aspects of open scholarly communication and so on. There is so much more to say about her, but it's better just to let her talk and teach us something in her presentation. The title of the presentation is From Concepts, Elements, and Principles to Practices and Standards of Open Science. So, Jadranka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Koraka. Thank you for the invitation. And when you asked me to talk about open science and ask me for the title, so I construct very ambitious title, as you see. And this title in theory looks fine, but in reality is quite different. Because the concepts, elements, and principles of open science are mixed in the literature. And in one paper, you will find the same terms as the concepts, and in another article as principles and similar. So, and practices, yes, practices are evolving and changing, and standards are not existing. So this title is not very much reflecting the reality, but I will try to copy it. So what is open science? When we ask for the definition of open science, maybe we can better start with the definition of science. And by science, I need to say that I mean scholarship, and also including social sciences and humanities. So what is science? If someone asks you to define science in one word, what word would it be? Often science is defined as objective, systematically organized knowledge. For example, in Croatian version of Wikipedia, it's such a definition. Very often science is defined as a method. I find this definition in University of Zadar website. And sometimes it's defined as public good, as on the website of our Croatian Agency for Science and Higher Education. Is it science exact and brings scientific facts and scientific truth, which we also hear very often? But sorry. I would say that science is a process, and I prefer this definition of science as an ongoing process where making key discovery often leads to many new questions and new investigations, new research. Furthermore, scientists are constantly elaborating, refining, and revising scientific ideas based on new evidence and perspective. And yes, science, with this process, science is using, of course, scientific methods, and the final output of this process contributes to human knowledge. And this final output should serve as public good. Unfortunately, the results of scientific research are often inaccessible. Researchers and research institutions are usually not the owners of what they produce, and the knowledge created is not public good and does not reach the public, which leads us to the concept of open science. Like science, there is no unique definition and widely accepted definition of open science. There are many definitions of open science. And I personally prefer this very old Foster definition where science is defined as a open science is defined as a practice of science in the way that others can collaborate and contribute, and where research data and other research results are freely available under terms that enable reuse, redistribution, and reproduction of the research and its underlying data and methods. So it's easy when I try to define elements of open science, it was quite easy. So elements are everything we build scientific and research community. First, stakeholders, researchers, which are usually authors, readers, editors. Here are also funders, research funders, policymakers, citizens. Elements of open science is research process itself and research outcomes, different research outcomes, not only text, but data, protocol, methods, code, etc. And of course, we have, we have a research assessment here as the quite important element of open science. Speaking about principles, I have singled out few principles of open science in this left column, although there are many more. We associate openness more with research outcomes and transparency more with processes, although you can consider those two terms as synonyms. There is also scientific rigor, which continues in dynamic area of research integrity. Open research, open science implies reproducibility and replicability. This is maybe not so relevant for the humanities, as I will mention later, but it's quite important principle of open science. And the situation with COVID-19 pandemics has shown us how powerful open science can be, and at the same time, how fragile could be, and how much attention we need to focus on research ethics. Also, open science will fully come to life only when we change evaluation system and define appropriate incentives and rewards, which will motivate researchers to accept the principles of open science. And we came to the concepts of open science. This was a most difficult part because there are so many concepts of open science in the literature, and you are all familiar with open access. When we speak about open data, we think about fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible data. And this is so data is so much in the focus that, and also European Open Science Cloud mentioned by Jennifer. So it's really the hottest topic in the open science, embedding research data and services. And when we mention open data, it's also important to say that the recent trend is also publishing negative results, which were not published before. Open formats, we are often neglecting formats for our research outcomes, and the format is really important. So we should really use formats whose technical specifications are public and with no restriction of access and implementation. So, and I don't consider PDF as the format which fits and match these criteria. From open source community, research community could learn really a lot, but of course, open science has as one important concept, open source. I will mention later open peer review, and yes, maybe open educational resources are just recently came into focus. Open licenses, of course, and addressing all these concepts implies open culture of the research community. But in order to make these concepts alive and effective, we need to move from open away from publications only towards opening the entire research life cycle. We need to stop stealing our own products and make everything the scientific community produces available. And we need to improve peer review system to have less retracted publications. And there is, of course, nothing wrong with all our rights reserved term, but it's problematic when these rights are in the hands of, not in the hands of scientific community, but in the hands of big publishers. So control over own results will enable research community to define the usage rights for the benefit of other scientists, society, and economy, using Creative Commons licenses. And last but not least, research evaluation. It will remain important in the ecosystem of open science, but we should make sure that it's not based solely on quantitative and often inadequate indicators, but considers qualitative evaluation too. There is no time to speak about all concepts, so I will just tackle a few of them very shortly. Regarding open access, many universities are offering, besides institutional repository for self-archiving all research outcomes, also publishing platform for journals, books, and other publications. So in Croatia, we have really excellent infrastructure for institutional repositories, and in very short time we reached the number of 160 institutional repositories in open access. Also, our academic community have few publishing platforms inside universities. For example, University of Zadar has More Press, and at Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Zagreb, there is also very live publishing platform for books, open books, of course. But it's maybe important to mention that also journals located in very narrow niche of particular field may have excellent editorial policy. And I like to use Glossa, a journal of general linguistics, and as an example of really high level of transparent editorial policy, which could be easily followed. There are a lot of many documents, white papers, guidelines, reports, tutorials, etc. on open research data, EOS, open science in general. And European Commission published also Open Data Directive, which is updated regularly, and asking member countries to adopt national policies on open research data. And I hope that this will also become adopted in Croatia with a new law on science and higher education, which is in preparation process, as I heard. There are numerous benefits of sharing research data, and not only for scholars and institutions, but also for research funders, society. And I named here only few of them. So it's a really increased transparency. It's good ground for trust in scholarly work and in research results. It's important that data can be used, and also it's very nice to have a long-term archiving and storage, and it's really beneficial when you have all your research outputs at one place. And it prevents in some way data manipulation. There are opportunities for new projects. And there are many benefits also for institutions. Greater impact in the scholarly community, increased productivity in times of limited budgets, etc. Open peer review is one of the very important part of open science. It's a peer review process which is not closed behind these different levels of blindness and secrecy, but this process where author actively participates and reviewer published a review publicly, and public can comment, and of course editor decides still on publication. We have so many variations of open peer review, and I will not mention all these levels of open peer review, but just few benefits of open peer review. So sometimes it's good to see who reviewed your work. And also it's good to have this dialogue between or author and reviewers, and between reviewers themselves. I recently reviewed one paper, and we were 2 reviewers using platform which enable us to communicate with each other. So it could be really useful. Open peer review is reducing bias among reviewers, and research showed that reviews are more constructive. And what is important, that reviewers can take credit for the work involved in conducting the review, which is not the case with the blind peer review. And just the 2 examples, one is Pablo's platform and one is reviewer credits. The both are promoting reviewers. And this second one is a little bit making this reviewers ecosystem more competitive, which is maybe good, maybe not so good, but both platforms are very popular. And how open peer review looks in practice, I will show you on the example of the new publishing platform of the European Commission, Open Research Europe, which includes all fields in science scholarship, however, including humanities and arts. And for example, one article, you can see all the data related with this. Of course, article is in open access. You can see that this specific article was accepted with version 1, which is I don't know, maybe it's more rarely, it's more often that article have version 2 after peer review. And on the right side, you can see 3 reviewers, their names, and of course their reviews. So you can open and see what was their opinion on this article and what kind of critics they have. So the reviewer has an option to accept the article, to accept with some reservations, and to reject. And I will finish this concepts with changes in the assessment, evaluation, and reward system, which are really necessary. And open science is opportunity for radical change in the way we evaluate, reward, and encourage science. Current evaluation system mainly rely on publications, number of publication, and or citations, and or prestige of journal or publisher. And such an emphasis does not correspond to the goal of achieving social impact, not only scientific. And there is this focus on the race in which scholars fight for as many papers as possible in prestigious journal and or books of leading publishing houses, which it's expensive and which is at the expense of innovation and knowledge exchange. And I don't know, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel of this prestige story. And I hope that something will change. And at the end, I would like to mention some specifics of the humanities, of course, related to open science. Because when we are speaking about open science, we should have in mind that open science, it's mainly driven by so-called hard sciences and primarily with the field of biomedicine. And we should really have in mind all how different fields are diverse, and especially humanities. There is lack of coherence among disciplines inside humanities, and there is really hard to quantify and to have precise conclusions when you deal with qualitative phenomena. In humanities, book is primary publication channel, and there is strong focus on national and regional subjects. Concept of authorship is very different in humanities. So we don't have, for example, in physics, we have 5,000 authors per paper. That it's not very usual, but it's not so rare also. But in humanities, we have single authorship. And what is more important, that two publications do not use the same arguments to answer the same question and arrive to the same conclusion. That's really something which is not happening in so-called hard sciences. Peer review is also not standardized practice. And when we are speaking about digital and digital tools, so there is it looks like the scholars in the humanities have primarily treated digital tools as external and supplemental to the research and scholarship practices. Still, open science can really contribute to the visibility of research in humanities. And although data collection is usually very complex in humanities, and very often we have possible copyright issues, still sharing the data in open repositories is beneficial. Access to originally fragmented data encourages greater collaboration between scholars. And it's important to mention that open science support equity, diversity, inclusion, multilingualism, multiculturalism, which are intrinsic values of the humanities. And developing digital humanities in the more open direction allows higher impact and ensure maybe more funding, and with more funding, more sustainability. Very shortly about a few examples relevant for humanities, for example, Directory of Open Access Books, which you all know, but it's interesting that our open access journal platform, HCHAC, when you look at the statistics, you can see that journals coming from the humanities are very popular. This is statistics for 2007 to today. And the most visited and downloaded articles are coming from, and the numbers are really huge. For example, for journal Društvena istraživanja, we have more than 2 million downloads and more than 4 million visits. These numbers are impressive, really. How open data can be shared in the humanities? I choose this example of University of Oxford, and you can see that the collection of writings on clay, it's available in open access, and you can really, if you are working with similar things, you can use their resources completely free of charge. regarding research assessment, I like this example of Ghent University really. And when they announced crucial changes in the research assessment system, they say we are transforming our universities into a place where talent once again feels valued and nurtured. And it's really nice to see what kind of evaluation criteria they are using. And I hope that we will adopt at least some of these criteria in our evaluation system. So you can see that this approach is really valuing differences between researchers, not only between disciplines, but also inside disciplines. Not every researcher is good in the same kind of activity. And I will end with this message. So engaging in open science practices will benefit development of open humanities. But instead of following open science practices and norms from other, much more dynamic and diverse disciplines, scholars in the humanities need to recognize the best principles for their scientific discipline and translate them into the best practices of the open humanities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jadranka, very much. There is so much to say about open science topics. So I know it was not easy for you to decide which way to go and what to say about it, but you did a great job. So thank you very much. And now we will go back to the open science topic. Jennifer already talked about European perspective. Now we will hear something about the Croatian initiative for the open science cloud. Our third presenter is Ivan Marić, the director of the University of Zagreb, University Computing Center, where he began his career in 1990. During his time in Srce, he played an important role in the creation and construction of the Croatian Academic and Research Network at the beginning of the 90s, and has since then participated in numerous national initiatives related to building Croatian infrastructure. On the international level, he is actively involved in building and governing major pan-European infrastructures like JAD and EGI. He holds several positions in international organizations as the national representative for Croatia, for example, in the EOS Steering Board and the EOS Association General Assembly. There is more to say about him, of course, but we don't have enough time to tell everything. He leads the National Strategic Project, Croatian Scientific and Educational Cloud, but he will say more about this topic, so I'll just give the floor to him.
Thank you, Coral. It was nice to listen to previous speakers, to Jay. I hope that I will be as energetic as my previous colleagues, Jennifer and Jadranka. Yes, this is my presentation, and I will talk about digital infrastructure because I built digital infrastructure for the last 3 decades, as Koratka said, and this is my task. Today I will speak about initiative. This is National Open Science Cloud Initiative in Croatia. We call it HR-OOZ because it's another project that I am leading. And it's called HR-OOZ, which is basically building, I will explain later, Okay, so I will not waste your time because I am in front of us and the lunch in between lunch. So as Jennifer explained already about EOS, I just skip very quickly through it because it's an introduction to my topic. EOS is something that is built over the last 7-8 years in Europe through Horizon 2020 program. You are familiar with different framework programs that European Commission is having, and this is 5 to 6 year framework programs, and then fitting projects into these framework programs. So it's basically a evolution of what is doing in Europe. And this is the trusted space, as already said several times. Thank you, Jennifer, for bringing me new perspective of republics. So Republic of Data, basically we call it Web of Research Data because I'm in the group of people that is more to the IT, World Wide Web community. And this is what we call Web of Research Data. And basically this is space where every researcher can come and find the tools, data, workflows, all what is needed for his or her work, but not just from his or her discipline, as said several times, but from many other disciplines. Key aspect of European Open Science Cloud is basically open science that was explained very deeply by Jadranka. And fair data, and I hope you realize what it is. It's findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable data. And this is the basic concept of Open Science Cloud. Prerequisite, or it is understandable that it is the alliance of existing and new research infrastructure. Like one of these is basically DARIAH. But if you look at S3 roadmap, like Jennifer referred to, the so many planned new infrastructure. There are so many old infrastructure that are closed, not so open. And EOS is about C. It's in the field that I'm coming from. Basically, we have 3 C: connect, communicate, collaborate. This is what we did by IT digital tools. For example, by network, we connect. Connection is the first step to communicate, and then communication is the first step to collaborate. So basically, collaboration is the ultimate goal of all these activities, and this is collaboration between different disciplines, different countries, institutions, like we are together here today. And in the concept of European Open Science Cloud, because we in Europe, we unlike some other regions in the world, we have this history of building tiering infrastructure. And this tiering infrastructure means 3 tiers: institutional, national, pan-European. So basically, if you build pan-European infrastructure, then basic building blocks are national infrastructure. Under the national infrastructure, there are institutional or thematical infrastructure. So National Open Science Cloud is basically this second tier building block in European Open Science Cloud. It has 2 levels. National, it will bring together all significant stakeholders and resources, like in discipline DARIAH, Croatia is bringing together all from this specific discipline. But in the concept of Open Science Cloud, we will bring similar initiatives like DARIAH together. And international, because we all together are digital bridges between national and international. So initiatives like EOS, but not just EOS, Euro HPC, PRAISE, EGI, OpenAir, etc., EUDAT. Open science, I'm shaming myself to repeat this because Jadranka explained it in much deeper and knowledgeable way. But looking from because Open Science Cloud initiative, if you took every word, you can make a few presentations on every word. Cloud is, for example, one. Openness is another, science, etc. And the initiative is collaboration. So we put definition in our memorandum of understanding, the document that we signed together, and I will explain later in this initiative. And it's basically repeating what is already said by Jadranka. I will not repeat it again. Openness, fair data, etc., etc. But what we are doing is basically we are taking the research life cycle. Research life cycle has several steps which are unique, generic, not specific per discipline, but basically it's collecting data, processing data, storing, and then we are looking these processes from the IT perspective. And then we are gluing some IT resources or digital tools to each of these process and then helping researcher to have this life cycle, research life cycle going on. And by putting these digital tools, we are basically gluing digital resources with the research infrastructure, and we are making more faster, etc., etc. So basically, this is yin-yang model. If you have data and no supercomputer, then you cannot process your data. But supercomputer without data is also useless because it needs data to be useful, etc., etc. You need high-speed network, you need storages to store data, and then you basically, you know, there is this long-term sustainability, which politicians like, not likes, dislikes, because, you know, if you store data, promise research community that this data will be available in 20 years, 50 years, because if you want this fair reusable, if you want that this data is reusable at 10, 20 years from now, then you have to invest some money. And the IT equipment is basically technological cycle is 5 to 6 years, and you have to renovate. It's very expensive. So the whole this concept of digital infrastructure with the research infrastructure is not cheap, I would say. So I like Jennifer talk because she returned 3rd century BC to show us how basically EOS concept was born in digital or in humanities. I could go. I hope you all read *Sapiens*, a short history of humankind. Okay, I can go very, very long time ago on the time when we become hunters to agriculture. And then we have 2 disciplines into this. So brief chronology, I will not go so far away. In Croatia, we have 30 years ago, just to show you how we build this Open Science Cloud, is basically we start with the infrastructure layer and we build first e-commons, it's communication commons, it's network, as I explained already. In 1992, National Research and Education Network was born in Croatia. At that time in Europe, all European countries were born NREs. Internet was born at that time. So web was born at that time. Now we are talking about web of research data. In Croatia, we have in 1992 Carnet. We bring IP in academic and research community in Croatia, Internet, new protocol. In 2000s, we built the first clusters, powerful computing resources. Then we built distributed infrastructure in different universities. In Croatia, we built it by Srce, we built it not centrally in Srce, but also we like it to include all universities. Then we build cloud virtual machines infrastructure. And lately, we build this on, because it's a technology trend that you can follow on this diagram. We build AI infrastructure, which is basic for the middleware or trusted identity infrastructure, which is the tool that we now use to authorize communities. So authentication and authorization of social science, digital humanities can be done. And then on top of that, we build information systems, applications, platforms, already told by Jadranka, Dabar, but in 1997, the group from Ruđer Bošković Institute started the project by Ministry of Science and Technology, Crosby. Then we have ARA, Dabar, you're familiar with this. Dabar is basically national repository system coordinated and hosted in Srce, which now hosts 160 institutional repositories. This is unique infrastructure that we have in Croatia. No one has it in Europe. In Europe, they have this on an institutional or university level, but we figure out in 2015 that we don't have enough IT resources or human resources to have it on a principle that we have lots of fragments. So we built a national platform that now hosts institutional infrastructure. Of course, institutions have to have librarians, digital librarians that can administer these institutional repositories. Then we have Research Data Alliance node in Srce hosted national node, and of course now we are in the project of building information system of research system called CRORIS. On top of that, we have research infrastructure consortiums, ERICs. And in Croatia, we start to join ERIC model, which is basically started in Europe during the Horizon 2020. The first ERIC was DARIAH. This is Croatia became the member of DARIAH Europe. Then it's followed by Clarin, C-ERIC, CESDA, CROSDA, EATRIS. So we have this building blocks, communication connection between European, Croatian research discipline communities and European research infrastructure. But not just technological and research infrastructure, we also did some work on policy, paperwork, so-called. So we have a Croatian Open Access Declaration from 2012 until now that we have a declaration on open science at University of Zadar, University of DARIAH. So basically, if you look at this brief chronology, we can say that in Croatia, we have this evolution, not revolution, but evolution in building pieces or elements of National Open Science Cloud as a part of this yin-yang model. In this model, there is this roles and project initiative that I will go briefly. So Croatian Scientific and Educational Cloud, this is HRZO first label, is strategic project in the field of science run by SRCE. We started this project pre-feasibility study we wrote in 2012. So we need 10 years to build infrastructure. I remember when we started Carnet project in 1991, we built it in 1 year, national infrastructure. Now we have to do it by rules of SAFU and others. Now we need 10 years. We have public procurement at that time, 1991, we didn't have so much strict public procurement. So basically, we will build this distributed national infrastructure of computing, storage, resources that will satisfy all research communities in Croatia. Supercomputing, transfer of big data, large network storage. We will build data centers in Zagreb, Osijek, and Split to host the equipment. So we will avoid all these little rooms with no adequate conditions for hosting ICT equipment on the faculties, on departments, etc., etc. So basically, this is something that we will be. This is computing and storage cloud. These are the physical elements that need to cloud to be alive. And just speaking today, last week, we certified the first data center. We have all public procurement finished, and we are now building 100 gigabit connection between these data centers. And next year, we will build ICT resources. We are hoping that this pandemic condition will not delay projects too much. So this will be this digital infrastructure that will be needed for Open Science Cloud. So how we start this National Open Science Cloud initiative, we have an installation guide, and it was basically do not reinvent the wheel principle, just use what you already have and use existing national elements for open science. And okay, we have these ERICs, why not use it? We do not establish a new one. So we start with already these digital bridges that we already have between Croatia and Europe, and rely on them. Also, there is a condition that we have to build national open science plan for research infrastructure, including the infrastructure, and this is not something that we are good at on a national level. Ensure funding and sustainability, this is something that we have to do, but also develop and maintain national cooperation, and this is very tricky because we like to close in our communities, etc. So we have to bring all these communities and to collaborate on a national level, horizontally and vertical. So we succeed. Basically, we put science at least one day in a paper. It was not just speaking about, I don't know, football or something else. So our task was, let's be one day in a paper with the minister, because minister will spend time on something at school, I don't know. And then we succeed, we bring 18 initial members, and we had this handing over ceremony for signing the memorandum of understanding of our national initiative on 3rd of September in Ministry of Science. There was Minister Fuchs and all these guys and girls taking the picture, and then we were one day in the paper. Okay, we spoke about science, open science. Topic was in media. Initiative was started by initial members, but initiative of course is open to all institutions. Initial members were chosen by the previous installation guide I explained. So it was research funding organizations, Ministry and Croatian Council, research performing organizations, 9 public universities in Croatia, coordinator of ERICS, like Institute of Technology for Research, Medical Faculty, Ruđer Bošković Institute, Faculty of I forgot one, I think, philosophy. And then we pick up the service providers like CERCE, providing services, digital services like NSK, providing speed, persistent identity. And of course, this was the core of 3 groups of institutions: research funding, research performing, and service provider institution. So we start with initial members and kick off the initiative, because if we wait to all 100 institutions, then we will never kick off. So it was basically start quickly and do it in a very quick time. And then we already have 2 new members like FOI and Institute for Social Research, IDI. Okay, Jokic just joined yesterday. I saw the letter. So basically, this is the open initiative. You can join, your institution can join. There is no strict condition. It's just that you stick to the goals or principles of open science. That was explained by Jadranka in previous lecture. So we have 2 goals. It's short-lived initiative. We have to produce something, and then we have to figure out how the future will be organized. So basically, we set up 2 goals: to have something defining organizational and governance structure of future HR-OOZ, and to draft a proposal of National Open Plan of Science for Open Science, and proposal for articles that will be part of the new law. Basically, this process of building the new law or getting new law out at the beginning of next year. So we have a timeline to say, okay, these are direction, how open science should be in this new law. Not deeply, but just to have principles or whatever in this. And of course, to have this template of open science policy on an institutional level. We figure out that on the first meeting, vice rector from University of Split was in the process of building their own open science policy. University of Osijek is doing that. So if we have university in Zadar and Rijeka that already did it, why don't we join together and exchange some information? So this is basically a platform with the main goal to communicate and collaborate, that I already explained. Timeline is basically that we have finish our results till the June next year, and basically after that we will have or not have organizational model of Open Science Cloud in Croatia. This is just a brief timeline. What steps are we progressing right now? So we had the first meeting shortly after ceremony, and basically initiative has a council. This is the representative and deputy representative from each institution that joined the initiative. We elect the president. I'm the president. Basically, you know, this is like old joke. Give it to them. So, and 2 vice presidents are basically the director of Croatian Science Council, Irena, and director of Ruđer Bošković today. And there are task forces as a tool to get to the goals, basically. And these task forces are working elements, basically filled by the people that will produce some papers that will be as a final result. Okay, this is what I already said in the previous, so I will skip it because there is no time. And let's go to the task forces. We approved 2 task forces. So basically, first task force is for drafting proposal of national open science plan and policies for open science. And basically, this task force has produced 3 documents. First one is the National Open Science Plan. We have lots of collection of how these national open science plans are in other European countries. So we will just make it local implementation in Croatia. Then there is this work that had to be done on the article of new law and template for open science policy on institutional level. In next few weeks, I hope that we will have a mapping of open science initiatives. So this is basically questionnaire that will be sent to community to fill out. The second group, the second task force, we will have to define rules of procedures of CROZ, elements of catalog of services. If you ask me, is there any difference between catalog of Croatian Open Science Cloud and catalog of services of European Open Science Cloud? There is no difference. So basically, every service that's produced by Croatian research community, science community, at the end have to be part of the European Open Science Cloud catalog. And of course, this is something that we will have to develop is terms of use template for services and resources, how my resource can be part of this, or what are the conditions to use these resources. Good thing is that we hooked up Ministry of Science that is paying all this. So these are the list of names of people, individuals that are willing to free their time to work next few months. And then we choose co-chairs in both groups. Maybe you know some of these names. Some of your names are here. So we expect that in the next month, these individuals will work hard to reach the goal. So co-chairs of the first group are Anna Maria Musa from Faculty of Law, University of Zagreb, and Bojan Macan from Đurđe Bošković Institute. And second group will be co-chaired by Draženko Celjak. He leads the DABAR in Srce, and Karolina Holub from National University Library in Zagreb. This is the timeline of task forces. This timeline is already broken because we had this information that Jadranka just also said, that we have to synchronize with the timeline of working group on the new law. So we have to provide them some information before they go to the public information, which is with the new law consultation, which is planned to be in the Q1 next year. So basically we have to move this proposal for provision relate to open science in the new law before February 2022 to December this year. And basically that's it. And my message at the end is join us. For all of you who are in the Croatian institutions who heard about this initiative, go to your directors, to your CEOs, and ask to sign the letter of joining to Croatian Open Science Cloud initiative. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And now I'm really sorry that we don't have enough time for a discussion because I really love this session and the topic of the open science. And since we have here such a great names, great people to discuss and to chat about these issues, but well, I will have maybe a little chat during the lunch break with Ivan Marić, but I'm really sorry that Jennifer and Jadranka can't be here with us. But thank you once again very much for your really great presentations and interesting topics. I hope all participants enjoyed. And now we will end this session. We will have a lunch break until 2 o'clock. And then we will see you again on the next section, named Culture Heritage in Digital Humanities. So I hope to see you again at 2 o'clock.